Welcome back. Well, starting tonight, we'll have a news segment on Sundays called Spotlight, where we go in-depth on important issues, people and events in the news. This week, we look at Singapore's bid to have the Botanic Gardens recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The process is in its final stages, and the team putting together Singapore's bid says it has so far received more than 60 feedback submissions from Singaporeans since it started its public consultations in mid-September. Sharon See looks at the history of the Botanic Gardens, the nomination process, and what it all means to Singaporeans.
The Botanic Gardens is the oldest park in Singapore, and it could now be on its way to UNESCO's World Heritage List.
Oh, I'm very proud of that, and I hope you get it.
Whether we eventually get it or not, I think it's just worth telling people that we have really a fantastic natural heritage here to preserve.
UNESCO uses 10 criteria to select its World Heritage sites. For example, a site could be a creative masterpiece, or it could contain unique evidence of past civilizations. Now, Singapore fulfills the second and fourth criteria. This means that it was an interchange of values in relation to technology, and it also contains outstanding examples of a type of building or landscape which illustrates a significant stage of human history. In relation to the second criteria, the Singapore Botanic Gardens helped to plant the seeds of the rubber industry. This rubber tree is an offspring of the original rubber trees that were introduced to the gardens in 1877. At that time, local planters preferred growing coffee and tapioca. But it was the garden's first director, Henry Ridley, who went around fervently promoting the rubber crop.
In the early days of harvesting rubber latex in the Amazon, they were taking wild trees and basically just lacerating the trunk. And it damaged the tree so badly, very often after a few times the tree just died. So Ridley devised a new method, a herringbone method, just like the bones of a fish, where he could repeatedly cut the trunk and latex would flow, and then a few days later he would cut the trunk again, and this did not kill the tree.
When the colonialists came out in the tropics, obviously they knew very little about tropical nature. The Botanic Gardens is the sort of very important R&D institute, because from there the colonialists were able to deal with plantation agriculture, which is similar with the Industrial Revolution in Europe.
By the early 20th century, Malaya became the world's largest rubber producer. But other than its economic contribution, the gardens have also grown close to the hearts of Singaporeans.
I've been here since I was a little boy. I remember reading a literature book and talked about cicadas in the air in the still of the afternoon. I came here and I closed my eyes and I listened, and the cicadas are there.
Those days when I came here together with my primary school classmate and we took photographs there.
As a memory bank, the Botanic Gardens also holds a wealth of information about Singapore's native flora.
The tree behind me is Pulau Basong. It's a swamp forest tree, and we used to have a lot of those in our swamps. Our swamps have been taken up by reservoirs and longkangs, and we've lost a lot of them. We have less than 20 available in Singapore. And this particular tree, we believe, was standing here at the time that the gardens were set up. So this heritage tree is a very important example of the conservation of flora undertaken by the Botanic Gardens.
Other than conserving plants, the Botanic Gardens also conserves a number of historical buildings. The oldest is Burkle Hall, built in 1868, just 9 years after the gardens were founded. It's a colonial bungalow built by the garden's first manager, Lawrence Niven, in a black and white plantation style. The materials used were all sourced locally. For example, the timber columns are made from extremely durable Tampines wood. The historical buildings fit the fourth selection criterion, which calls for an outstanding example of a type of building or landscape.
What is really unusual and special about this landscape, and I don't think most people recognise this at the moment, is that it's in the English landscape style, which is very informal. And you see such landscapes in the Northern Hemisphere, much closer to the North Pole. But this is one of the very few, and perhaps the only example, which you find very close to the equator. So it's a classic English landscape imposed close to the equator in the tropics with tropical vegetation and utilising the unique topography of this site.
Making a bid for the UNESCO stamp of approval, Acting Minister Lawrence Wong says is a signal of Singapore's commitment to its heritage and history.
We already have today 65 national monuments which are protected under the law. And we are continuing to identify and expand this list of historic sites. But having a site that is a UNESCO World Heritage Site would raise our commitment to an even higher level. It's an international commitment, and it's a commitment to safeguard and protect something that we hold dear and that is precious to us as Singaporeans.
If anything else, the Botanic Gardens represents for Singaporeans a kind of a place of permanence. A lot of things in Singapore have disappeared. Buildings have come and gone, right? You go out of Singapore 2 years, you come back, suddenly a landscape has changed. So I think this is one place among others that anchors us all, the Singaporeans, to Singapore.
Last week, the Singapore government submitted the first draft of its nomination to UNESCO before the final submission in February. Meanwhile, the government is collecting public feedback until December, and some will be included in the submission.
We've invited Singaporeans to contribute their memories, photographs, stories about their experiences in the Botanic Gardens. And we will compile all of these memories as part of our bid, so that when we eventually submit a bid to the UNESCO World Heritage Committee, it will be a bid that is put together by all Singaporeans.
One lady, for example, remembered me telling her some time ago that there's a curious arrow in one of our lakes, actually in Symphony Lake behind us. And she thought we should explain what this arrow is for, because at the moment there's no sign, and it's a very interesting story. Nearly 100 years ago, the Royal Meteorological Society in London at Greenwich and the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C. worked together to measure the Earth's magnetism at different points on the Earth's surface. And when they came to Southeast Asia, they chose this particular spot in the Botanic Gardens where they made their measurements. Later, that area became a lake.
Once the nomination documents are submitted, the UNESCO World Heritage Committee will spend the next year evaluating. The final result is expected to be out in 2015.
The value of this, regardless of the outcome, as you say, is that we have a conversation about our past, about what is meaningful to us as Singaporeans. And that conversation itself is a very valuable thing, because it, I think, would give us a better sense of what we hold dear as Singaporeans, what our sense of identity and culture and our heritage is about.
Home to 1,200 species and 2,000 hybrids of orchids, the Singapore Botanic Gardens is visited by 4 million people every year. But compared to Angkor Wat in Cambodia and the Great Wall of China, the Singapore Botanic Gardens may seem small in scale. But perhaps the value of heritage can't simply be compared this way. As one of the few botanic gardens in the tropics, the Singapore Botanic Gardens has been a cultural icon for as long as many Singaporeans remember.
And this has been Singapore Tonight. Bye-bye.